Now, before it's gone, on STV Player.
The game's up.
Repairing our relationship across the political divide can only be done with someone else at the helm.
He has jumped before he was pushed.
We need to bring the party together. We need to unify the party. We need to try to reset the tone in Parliament.
After today's dramatic resignation of Humza Yousaf, what now for the Scottish Government and Scottish politics? Is John Swinney going to be our next First Minister at Holyrood? In the end, Humza Yousaf was the architect of his own downfall. After he decided to dump the Greens from the Scottish Government last Thursday, he found himself battling for survival in the face of two looming confidence votes at Holyrood. Today, he conceded his time was up. He declared he was quitting as the SNP leader and First Minister, saying he would leave when a successor is found.
For a minority government to be able to govern effectively and efficiently, trust when working with the opposition is clearly fundamental. And while a route through this week's motion of no confidence was absolutely possible, I am not willing to trade my values and principles or do deals with whomever simply for retaining power.
Well, the focus at Holyrood has now turned to who will succeed Humza Yousaf. The party stalwart John Swinney has emerged as the hot favourite, with support from senior colleagues, including Neil Gray, Jenny Gilruth and Stephen Flynn. Swinney served as the SNP leader 2 decades ago, and then later in government he was the Finance Secretary under Alex Salmond, before becoming the Deputy First Minister to his ally Nicola Sturgeon. While on a visit to London, he reacted to calls for him to return to the front line.
I've been somewhat overwhelmed by the requests that have been made of me to do that, with many messages from many colleagues across the party. So I'm giving that issue very active consideration, and it's likely I'll have more to say about that in the days to come. There's the whole question of my family, and I have to make sure that I do the right thing by my family. They're precious to me. I have to do the right thing by my party and by my country. So there's lots to be thought about.
Well, these are clearly very tough times for the SNP and the Scottish Government. The Deputy First Minister, Shona Robeson, spoke to STV's political editor, Colin Mackay.
Shona Robeson, what do you make of Humza Yousaf standing down just a few days after he said he was going to lead the party into the next election?
Well, today was obviously a very difficult day. I thought his statement was very dignified. I thought he gave a very personal account of what it meant to him being First Minister, breaking the mould, the first Minister from an ethnic minority background. And of course, he has shown leadership on the world stage around the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, among other issues. So it was a difficult day, but I think he handled himself with great dignity.
But also it was his miscalculation that led him to this. It was him that broke the government.
And of course the mark of the man himself is that he's owned that, and he has said it was a miscalculation, a misjudgment, and of course he's paying the ultimate price for that. And he is one of his own worst critics in that respect. But we are where we are, and it's important that the party now moves on. You say we are where we are. Where are we? What is his legacy? Where does he leave the SNP and the Scottish Government? Well, actually, when you look at the things that he's achieved over the last year, if you look at 100,000 children being lifted out of poverty, making sure that we continue with those really important policies, lots of things happening on the green energy front, and of course his leadership over Gaza when other politicians have been, quite frankly, quite mealy-mouthed. So he has a lot to look back on that he can be very proud of. But he said he'd be the first activist. You've seen the biggest swing to Labour in a by-election in Scotland under his leadership. Well, look, we need to rebuild the trust of the Scottish people. We need to make sure that here in the Parliament and the Scottish Government will need to focus on priorities, on delivery. We've got some work to do, and I think we all acknowledge that.
Your party criticised the Conservatives at Westminster for the revolving door of Prime Ministers. You've got the same revolving door of First Ministers in Scotland now, haven't you?
Well, of course, we have a fixed-term election here in Scotland. So if there was an election now, there'd be another election in 2 years' time. Plus, if you look at the mandate we had...
But you don't think there's going to be an election now, do you?
No, absolutely. We have a mandate.
Is that part of the reasoning behind them quitting, so that there's no chance of that early election?
Well, we have a mandate from 2021, actually one that's almost a majority in this Parliament. So we have way in excess in terms of the number of MSPs beyond any other party. So it falls to us as our responsibility to make sure that we have a sensible and orderly transition and that we bring forward a candidate for First Minister. And it needs to be someone, I think, that can perhaps try to reset some of the tone in here. I know that will be a challenge, but to build relationships and to try and work a bit more across the Parliament.
John Swinney?
Well, look, there are a number of names that are being speculated upon.
But his is the main name, isn't it, in the frame? Some of the other potential candidates have already backed him.
Well, look, I'm not going to back anyone during this campaign. I am going to get on with the job of Deputy First Minister. There's a lot happening, legislation coming forward on the Post Office and other really important matters that we'll need to...
But you wouldn't be opposed to John Swinney as leader, would you?
I've got a huge respect for John Swinney. I've worked with him for a number of years and he has a lot of skills and talents and experience.
He didn't want to do it this time last year. What's changed? Is it just the party calling on him and calling on his loyalty to serve?
Well, that will be a judgment for John around how he feels, where he is, where the party is, where the government is, where the country is. And, it will be a judgment for him about whether he feels it's the right time. We need to bring the party together. We need to unify the party. We need to try to reset the tone in Parliament. So it needs to be somebody who can do that. And I'm sure John will be contemplating whether he's got the right skills and experience to be that person. As I say, though, I won't be endorsing anyone.
Humza Yousaf suggested today that Scotland was closer to independence than ever. It doesn't feel that way to an awful lot of people. A lot of people who didn't think that he was delivering in the independence front as SNP leader.
Well, look, if you look at the polls of support for independence, they're consistently high and actually higher than support for the SNP at the moment. So
which has been falling under his leadership.
We've got work to do to make sure that we get back that independence support, because only through the SNP will we deliver independence. So we've got work to do, and the new leader will have work to do.
Shona Robertson, thanks for joining us in Scotland tonight.
Thank you.
Now to Holyrood's main opposition party, the Scottish Conservatives, who last week tabled a motion of no confidence in Humza Yousaf. Their deputy leader is Megan Gallagher. So you say you're going ahead with the no confidence motion in Humza Yousaf, but what's the point when he said he's already planning to go?
Well, the vote of no confidence is still tabled at present. I do acknowledge the vote of no confidence has achieved its purpose in Humza Yousaf resigning. However, we still don't know about the process. I think the First Minister's resignation speech today was very vague on that, how long he would remain in post as First Minister. And I think it is incumbent on the official opposition to continue to hold him to account, because we don't know the time frame as to how long he will remain in post.
You want rid of the SNP government, but do you not accept that the SNP still has a mandate from the 2021 election when they almost won a majority of seats?
But they haven't won a majority, and given the events of the last few days, I think it's going to be a tough time for the SNP moving forward. I don't think it really matters who forms the next First Minister. I think it will be independence first, last and always, and it will not be a government that's focused on the priorities of the people of Scotland.
But why would you want a Scottish election now when the Tories are so far behind in the polls?
Well, I relish an election. There'll be seats right up and down the country. That'll be a straight fight between us and the SNP. And we've got a clear message. If you want to rid Scotland of the divisive politics that have been created by the SNP, whether that be independence or legislation such as the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, it'll be a vote for the Scottish Conservatives in seats right across Scotland, where it'll be a straight fight between us and the SNP.
Megan Gallagher, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Well, now to the thoughts of the SNP's erstwhile partner in government, the Scottish Greens. Co-leader Patrick Harvie came into the studio. So John Swinney is looking like hot favourite to become the next First Minister. Could you work with him as the First Minister of a minority government?
Well, the Scottish Greens certainly won't be giving you names of people that we think the SNP should vote for. That's for them to decide. And just as we did last year, we'll set out a clear position on the values that we think are necessary. What Humza Yousaf did last week was to end a progressive pro-independence majority government. They decided to move into minority government. OK, that can be stable and Greens can play a part in that, but it needs to be a progressive government and it needs to continue to accelerate action on social justice, on economic justice and on cutting carbon emissions in the light of the recognition that we're years behind where we should be on climate. You
have worked with John Swinney before, though. Is he a man you can trust?
John Swinney obviously is a very experienced character, but there are people across the SNP who have a range of different experience. I don't want to speak for him in terms of a decision he'll make, and I certainly don't want to speak for the SNP in terms of the decision they need to make. I think it's worth recognising as well the human impact on this. John Swinney has spoken about how difficult it's going to be to make that decision. Humza Yousaf spoke about how difficult it's been for him to acknowledge the need to step back. And I give him credit for taking responsibility for the actions that he took last week and deciding to step down. But it's a difficult thing to ask anyone to do, and the human impact really does matter.
Now that Humza Yousaf is going, and it's him that you had the issues with, not the party, would you consider another parliamentary partnership with the SNP?
I don't think either party thinks that it would be appropriate to try and recreate the Butte House Agreement. Trust was broken, particularly with that last week, but a number of other issues in the past as well. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that over the course of the Scottish Parliament there have been majority, minority, coalition. There's been a range of different ways in which government can be stable. Yeah. Minority government can be stable. And it should be. The country needs stability after the turmoil we've had. OK,
do you bear any responsibility for this state of affairs, as it was your party members that were going to hold this meeting to see whether or not you're going to leave the government? And that's what led to Humza Yousaf's decision. So do you bear any of the responsibility?
Every party bears a share of responsibility. I don't think anything the Greens have done is intended to generate chaos or drama for its own sake, unlike, for example, the way the Tories are behaving at the moment. The Greens wanted an open, democratic discussion about a cooperation agreement that, remember, was shaped and then signed off by the members of both parties. Perfectly appropriate for the members of the Scottish Green Party to debate that. OK, Patrick Harvie, thank you so much for joining us this evening. To reflect on the challenges facing the Scottish Government, we brought together the Scotsman's political correspondent, Rachel Amery, and two people who've been influential within the SNP over recent decades, the former Cabinet Secretary, Alec Neil, and the former Senior Government Advisor, Stephen Noon. So, Rachel, looks like John Swinney is already the favourite, picking up lots of support. Is it inevitable that he will become the next First Minister?
At this point, it does seem quite likely that is what is going to happen. Obviously, we had this statement from him this afternoon in the middle of London, and you kind of don't make a statement like that unless you're going to follow through and then declare you are interested in this. So I do expect that's what's going to happen here. As you said, there's plenty of really senior figures within the SNP who have now said that they're going to back him. So we've had Stephen Flynn, for example, Ian Blackford, Mary McCallan, Jenny Gilruth. These figures have already all said they're going to back John Swinney there. And I think that's because he's very experienced, but he's also seen as quite a sort of safe and steady hand and perhaps could unify the entire party. And that's perhaps what the party needs at this point after such a tumultuous year. So I think that's probably what they're wanting to do. And I think they're also going to want to try and get a candidate in as quickly as possible without a leadership contest. Because if you looked at the polls before last year's leadership contest, the SNP were doing very well. Once the leadership contest started last year and you saw the rifts starting up, that's when the polls started to go down for them.
So, Alec, lots of people urging John Swinney to go for it, but the prospect of Swinney taking charge doesn't fill you with enthusiasm, does it?
No, not at all. For a number of reasons. I think the party has to think really seriously and not allow itself to repeat what happened last year and be bulldozed into accepting a candidate who turns out, as many of us said, to be the wrong candidate and it ends in tears. The key issue for the party is to win back the voters we've lost in the last few years. And I believe what the voters are looking for is not a continuity of the last 3 or 4 years, which have been disastrous for the party under Sturgeon and Swinney. What they're looking for is a fresh approach, a new face, a new generation probably. Because if we just continue with the old guard, we're going to end up where we don't want to be, which is losing even more seats than predicted in the election. So my view is, no disrespect to John, he's served the party well, but my view is we need a fresh face, a fresh approach, and we need to go out there and win people's hearts and minds.
Alec,
and I don't think somebody associated with the last 3 or 4 years' failure is the right person to do that.
Alec, are you saying, do you think John Swinney would be a disaster?
I'm not using the word disaster, but I don't think he would be the right guy at the right time and the right job. John's been the leader before and he wasn't a successful leader in his own admission. He actually said after that he should never have been the leader. He's a good guy, he's a good number 2 and all that kind of stuff. But to be the leader, you have to appeal to a wide electorate right across Scotland. And I think the electorate are absolutely... Remember, John was the author of the deal with the Greens that's been so disastrous for the SNP. Oh. So the party shouldn't be voting for who they want. They should be voting for who would the electorate and who would win more votes for the SNP and save seats.
Let's get Stephen's reaction to that. He's not the right guy for this time.
So I voted for Kate last year because I was persuaded of her case for continuity, not cutting it. I think there's some persuasion in what Alec is saying, but I think the primary need for the party at the moment is stability and unity. And I think that actually a dream ticket, if I could use that phrase, would be John Swinney as leader, bringing in Kate into a substantial position, economy, finance, within the cabinet. So I think John as leader would have experience. He's a wise man. He's taken a step back over this last year, which I think is probably quite important. He's learned a lot over the 20 years since he was leader. During the first SNP minority government, he was a key player in terms of making minority government work. So I think John has got the skills in terms of his capacity to get back into a minority government mindset, which is really important for the party. But he also has the ability to bring in people like Kate, which I think is also very important, because we do need to present some degree of change.
Alec, just to come back on that, do you not think you need a steady hand at this moment in time after this very tumultuous time, as Rachel described it?
Well, I think Kate Forbes would be a very steady hand, but the important point is getting momentum with the electorate. Harold Wilson used to say about the Labour Party that the best way to unite the Labour Party was to have it in 5th gear. The SNP is in reverse gear at the moment, and I think somebody like Kate, if she stands, is far more likely to get it into 5th gear with the electorate than part of the old guard like John, who's associated very much with the Sturgeon era and all the negative vibes about that amongst the electorate at the present time. The party shouldn't be thinking internally, it should be thinking externally about the electorate. And as Harold Wilson rightly said, get us into 5th gear and that'll unite the party. Nothing unites the party like getting into 5th gear.
Right, Rachel, so if Kate Forbes did stand and she won, how difficult would it be for her to be First Minister, though? Because, given how only a relatively small number of MSPs would be supporting it, it'd be difficult for her at Holyrood.
It could potentially be. It depends on who she then brings in around her in her cabinet. When it came to the SNP leadership contest last year, she actually polled very well with SNP members. I think it was about 48% of the vote that she got. So the members are not who she needs to worry about. It's the Holyrood group and trying to get enough backing inside Holyrood itself that she's going to need to worry about. But I think that's going to be a case of who does she bring in around her and who does she trust to have these senior positions.
Yeah, but she does have a lot of support within the membership, as Rachel says, but that would be a problem at Holyrood, though.
So, as I said, I voted for Kate last year. She's a substantial candidate, but I think her contribution this time is not as leader. So I think the circumstances are different 1 year on. And where the challenge was the continuity, the problem of continuity, the challenge now is unity. And I struggle to see Kate delivering the same degree of unity as John would And that's unity within the party, but it's also the capacity to reach out within Parliament. So it's really important for the SNP moving forward that we step away from the majoritarian mindset that we've had. We have to move into a different way of operating within the country and within Parliament. And I think John has those skills. He's a supremely wise politician. He's got the experience of the ups and downs of politics. He's from the time when the SNP didn't always win elections. These are really valuable skills for a leader to be having as we move into the next stage.
I mean, Alec, would he not be the person that could reach out and, you know, get consensus within the Parliament? And would that not be a dream ticket with Kate Forbes then being the deputy?
Well, I think John is still very much tied to the Greens, and informally now rather than formally, and I think there's a real problem there. I also think you have to think of the electorate. The electorate don't see it the way Stephen sees it. They're not insiders. When they go to vote, they vote on the basis of their image of people and what they're saying and doing. Their view is, and they've expressed this in our by-election, local by-election after local by-election, we're losing all the by-elections at the present time because the electorate are not happy. John is Mr. Continuity Mark II. That is the last thing we need, because the last year has been seen as a continuum of the previous 3 or 4 years, and all of them have been perceived to be a total disaster. John was part and parcel of that, cannot dissociate himself from it, and therefore we need a fresh face at the top. Bring John into the team. Alec, a fresh face at the top.
Alec, very briefly, do you think Kate will stand?
Well, I spoke to her tonight and she's giving very serious thought to it. I think she can win, actually, because she, as Rachel said, she got 48% of the vote last year. When all of these people who are saying they vote for John, exactly the same people who told us to vote for Humza and got it completely wrong. If we get it wrong again, we are going to be toast in this election and probably toast in 2026 as well.
Stephen, if there was a leadership battle between the two of them, would that be damaging for the SNP? Because we saw what happened last time.
It doesn't have to be damaging. So I think there's a both-and mentality here. So it's not an either-or of John and Kate. I think we can have the both and of John with the experience and Kate with the freshness, the new ideas. And I think they both appeal to different groups in Scottish society. So I think that would be a ticket that would broaden the SNP's appeal.
Rachel, do you think the SNP would be quite happy if it was just John Swinney, you know, the coronation and he became leader? Would they want to avoid a leadership battle?
I think that option means that they get somebody in place very, very quickly. Because let's not forget, at some point this year, there's going to be a general election. We don't know when that's going to happen, but it could be announced very, very soon. And the SNP will want to avoid a situation where they're having to start election campaigning properly while they don't have a leader in place and while there's not a First Minister that's an SNP member.
OK, we'll have to wait and see how it all unfolds. But thank you all very much indeed for joining us this evening.
Pleasure.
And that's all from Scotland Tonight. I'll be here tomorrow. Until then, as if there wasn't enough drama at the Scottish Parliament today, the Holyrood Dog of the Year competition took place with the SNP MSP's Mary Muneer's terrier Heidi taking first prize. Here's one last thing.
It's all about celebrating our dogs, the dogs that we have in our lives, the big difference they make, but also recognising that they're a big part of public policy making, and they're very important for politicians and people working at the Parliament as much as they are for us as organisations and everybody in the wider public.